Hey everyone, and welcome to another HOI4 mining lesson on the Iron Workshop. In this lesson, we'll learn how to create new characters in HOI4. Now, this is a topic that I covered before, but things have changed significantly in the 1.11 version of the game that came out with the No Step Back DLC. So the old lessons aren't really valid anymore, and that is why we have this new lesson. Now this lesson encompasses all the character types, and it is going to be quite long, but you don't really have to watch all of it if you want to create a specific type of character. So before I begin this lesson, I do want to mention a couple of things. First of all, it is no longer possible to edit advisors in real time. Previously, you could edit advisors when you were in debug mode, and the changes would take effect in-game in real time. You didn't have to restart the game for that to show, but unfortunately that is no longer the case, and that seems to be the price that we pay for the new system. Overall, the benefits that we gain by the new system are probably worth it, and who knows, maybe in the future Paradox will once again bring the option to make these changes in real time. Second, please use the video chapters to skip to specific parts after we're done with the basics of the lesson, and I will let you know when that is. So you don't have to watch the entire lesson, you can just skip to whatever you want to create. Next, please make sure to download paint.net to edit the character graphic files. Now the reason that I'm insisting on paint.net is because it has built-in DDS file support, and these are the files that are used by the character graphics. If you have another graphic software that you're comfortable with and you know how to create DDS files in, that is totally fine. You don't have to use paint.net. But if you're not familiar with any other graphic software and you don't really know how to do this, follow along and use paint.net. I will have a link in the description to the download page of paint.net, so make sure to grab that. Next, you should use vanilla game code samples instead of writing your own. Now, for most of you watching, this is probably the first time that you're going to be doing this. And if you're a first timer, then it is highly recommended to use vanilla code samples instead of writing your own, because then it means you're not making spelling mistakes and you're not putting the code maybe where it doesn't belong, and that reduces your capacity for errors. Obviously, as you gain more experience, then you can start actually typing some of the code on your own. But for now, it is best to copy the existing code and then make changes to it according to what you need. And one last thing, please make sure to work in steps. Don't try to create all of your characters at once. So once you have created one type of character and you're satisfied with it, go into the game, make sure that it works, that it shows up, and after that proceed to your next character. Don't try to do it all at once, because that again opens you up for mistakes and things to go wrong and not work. Alright, so as I said, this lesson is going to be a bit long, it's going to be a little bit complex, but if you follow along, you should be able to get the results that you want. It is totally okay if it doesn't work on your first try. That is usually how it goes with modding or programming and things like that. Stuff doesn't always work on the first try, but keep trying and I'm sure that you will manage. Alright, so with all of that said, let's roll the intro and start the lesson. Alright, let's get started. So the first step in creating our new characters is to create our file and folder structure. This is essential in order for the game to know where the files are located and how to access them. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing that I'm going to do is to open the mod folder of HOI4. You can find that in Documents, Paradox Interactive, HOI4 mod. Now in here I already have a folder called New Characters mod, and that folder is here because I created a new mod with the game launcher. If you want to learn how to create a new mod, I have a video for that, so go ahead and watch that. And after you've created your new character mod, you can proceed to the next step. The next step is to open the vanilla HOI4 folder, and that one can be found in Steam, Steam Apps, Common, HOI4. And what we're going to do now is copy some files and folders from the vanilla folder to our mod folder. So the first folder that we need is the common folder. So I'm just going to go over here and create this folder, common. Inside the common folder, there is a folder called characters. So I'm going to create that one as well. Notice that I'm creating it inside the common folder. And from the characters folder, I'm going to grab one of these files and move it over to my mod. Now, for the purpose of this lesson, we will be creating new characters for Cuba. The reason that I chose Cuba is because it's a small country that has very few characters, so it's a bit easier to work with, but you can do this for any country. If you're new, then I suggest you follow along and go with Cuba as well. So let's locate the file for Cuba. It should be right over here, CUB. So I'm going to grab this file and I'm going to put it inside the characters folder of my mod. Excellent. So we are done moving files into the common folder. We don't need anything else in here. So I'm going to go back to the root folder of my mod, and I'm going to go to the root folder of HOI4 like this. So now we're back where we started. And the next folder that I'm going to copy is the history folder. So I'm going to create the history folder in here. Just like here. Let's open the folder, open it in here. In here, I'm going to copy the folder called countries. So let's recreate that folder in here. Now, I apologize for saying that I'm going to copy a folder. That is not actually what I mean. I actually mean that I'm going to create the folder. So we have our countries folder, countries, and from here I'm going to once again grab the Cuba file. So let's find Cuba in here as well. So Cuba should be, let's take a look. There we are. So I'm going to copy it over here as well. Excellent. And now we are done with the history folder. So let's go back. The next folder that I'm going to need is the GFX folder. So let's go ahead and create that folder in our mod. We'll go in here. In here, there's a folder called leaders. So I'm going to recreate that folder inside the GFX folder. Just like this. And in here, we have folders for the countries that have custom portraits. So in here, I'm going to create the Cuba folder. So I'm going to recreate the Cuba folder. And in here, it is called CUB, just like the other files were named. So let's create CUB. And I'm going to grab this file from here and I'm going to put it in here. And this might be a good time to actually rename this file to the character that I'm going to create. I'm going to name him portrait large SpongeBob. Very good. Now we are done with the GFX folder. Let's go back to our root folders. The next folder that we'll need is the interface folder. So let's go ahead and create the interface folder inside of our mod. And from here, we're going to grab the leader portraits.gfx file and put it in our own interface folder. And once again, I'm actually going to rename this file. I'm going to call it new Cuba characters. Excellent. Let's go back. We're done with the interface folder. And now we need the localization folder. So I'm going to recreate this folder inside of my mod as well. Let's open it. I'm going to recreate the English folder because I will be creating a mod in English. So let's go in here. And from here, I'm actually going to copy one of these files. It doesn't really matter which file. Let's just go and grab this first one called abilities and just put it in here inside of our mod. And I'm going to rename this file new characters. Now it is very important that when you name your localization file that you end the suffix with underscore L English. Of course, if you're using the English language, if for some reason you're using another language, then obviously put that language. This is very important. If you did not put underscore L English, then your localization will not show up. Alright, so we're basically done. One more file that I actually do want to grab that I forgot about in the GFX folder. Let's go in here. In here, I'm going to go into interface. Inside the interface folder, there is a folder called ideas. So I'm going to open that one. And in here, I'm going to locate a character portrait. For example, this one. It doesn't really matter which one. I just need the file for reference, and I'm just going to put it in here. We're going to get back to these files once we've reached the step where we create our character portraits. For now, just put it here inside the GFX folder, and that should be enough. Alright, so we're done creating our folder and file structures. We won't be needing any more files from the vanilla folder, but we might need other files for reference. And you will see what I mean once we continue with this lesson. But for now, we're done with step number 1, and we can proceed to step number 2, creating country leaders. Alright, so let's start creating our new characters. The first character we're going to create is a country leader. So as you know, HOI4 has various types of characters. We have country leaders, we have political advisors, and we have generals, which include corps commanders and field marshals and admirals. So we're going to focus on country leaders first. And before we actually start writing any code, I do want us to take a look at the files and try to understand more or less what's going on in there. So I'm going to open my mod folder. I'm going to go to common, characters, and let's open our Cuba file. And let's see what's going on in here. So as you can see, each character's file begins with this line, characters. And after that line, we have a definition for each character. So the definition goes like this. And as you can see, it even allows these special characters in here, but I would actually advise you not to use these special characters because it could cause some problems down the line. So in here, which is the definition of your character or the ID of your character, it is best to just give it a name in plain English letters. Don't use special characters like this one. You can use special characters in here in name, but we will talk about that a bit later, how you define the name. The next section that each character definition has is its portraits, and then you have the types. So for example, you have country leader in here, next in here you have advisor, and so on. Now I do want to mention that despite the fact that the new system makes significant improvements to how characters are handled by the game, the files themselves can get a little bit messy. And that is something that we're going to try to avoid, and we will do our best to make sure that our files are written properly. So for example, in here you can see that there are some indentation problems and things look quite messy. So we are going to avoid that. And the way that we're going to do that is by cleaning up the file and creating things somewhat from scratch, but still copying example codes from the vanilla files. All right, so let's start creating our new country leader. The first thing that I'm going to do here is to clean up all of this stuff. And the way that I'm going to do that is by removing all the characters except for this first one. Now each character is defined by its opening bracket and its closing bracket. So as long as you have this section in here, the character will still stay in the game. So let us remove all of these other characters after this closing bracket. So I'm going to hold the Shift key on my keyboard. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the end of the file, and I'm going to click here and then press delete. Now, the way that you can make sure that you deleted things properly is by clicking here on this opening bracket of characters and making sure that it closes here with this closing bracket. In your version of Notepad++, it is possible that it will be highlighted in some other color other than yellow, but as long as these two are highlighted, you know that it is closing properly, so that's fine. All right, now let's change this character in here. Please make sure to follow some kind of a pattern when you give your characters IDs, names, and so on. So for example, here you can see that each character starts with the country tag. The country tag is the 3-letter identification that tells the game which country it is. It doesn't really matter in here. So for example, even if you're creating a character for Cuba, you could put something else, but it would just not make sense. It really helps to have the associated country that this character is for in the beginning of the character definition. So let's stick with that and give our character a name. So we will call it CUB for Cuba. And after that, I'm going to type SpongeBob. Just like that. Next, let's assign our character name. When assigning a name to your character, you can handle it in 2 ways. The first way, just like it's done in here, is to put the name directly in here inside the name definition. This tells the game that the name of this character is whatever you define in here. Another way to do it is to put something called a localization key. And that means that you're telling the game that the name of this character is some kind of a key which will be located inside a localization file. When should you choose to do it one way or another? It's a bit difficult to answer because it really depends on your approach and what you use these characters for. For me personally, I do like to have things more organized, so I would prefer to put my character names inside a localization file. Another reason that you may want to do it via a localization file is that, for example, when we have names like the Democratic Assembly, right? So let's say that the character that I have is actually some kind of an organization or maybe like a regency, things like that. If I put it directly in here, I can't localize it. I can't translate it. So anyone who would want to translate this name will have to change the code in here, and that would be a problem. They can't just change the name in the localization file and not touch the code in here. So that is why I prefer to put things in localization files, because later on maybe I want to make some changes and I want to be able to localize and use localization files. So that is why localization keys are better. And that is what we're going to do in this lesson. If, however, you choose to put your localization of the name directly in here like this, that is totally fine. That will work as well, but that is really completely up to you. Now let's put a localization key. I'm going to put in here something like this, Cuba character SpongeBob. And this is a localization key. This is something that will appear later on in the localization file that we'll be creating. And this is how the game will know what to call this character. Otherwise, if it can't find this, you will just see CUB_SpongeBob in the game. All right, so hopefully this was clear. Let's move on. Next, we have our portraits. And actually, I don't want to touch this section yet. I have a separate section for creating portraits, and I will talk more in depth about that in there. For now, let's not touch this and leave it as is. And next we have our character definition, so which type of character it is. And in our example, it's a country leader. So when you assign a country leader, you need to give him the ideology. You can also set when this leader is set to expire, when this leader will no longer be available. And you have something called ID. Now, you actually don't need to assign an ID. It is not mandatory. You can always access the character via this indication in here, this character ID. You don't need a specialized ID number, but that is something left over from how country leaders were set before version 1.11. I'm just going to get rid of this line. I don't really need it. Now, you may be asking yourself, how do I know what to put in ideology? And that is a totally legitimate question. It is very important that you understand that in here you don't put the ideologies used by countries. You put the sub-ideologies that are defined for the major ideologies used in the game. In order to make this a little bit more clear, let me open the ideologies file. That one is located in Hearthstone 4 Common Ideologies. So let's open that. And in here, if we take a look, we see that we have our democratic ideology. That is something that you would define for the country. And this democratic ideology has 3 types: conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. So for characters that are country leaders, you put one of these subtypes of ideology, right? So if I want my country leader to be a democratic leader, to be used when the country is a democracy, I can either make him a conservative, a liberal, or a socialist. And I just put it in here. In this case, we see that he's a liberal. And this is valid for all other ideologies. So for example, if I wanted to make the character communist, I would not put communism in here. That would be incorrect. I would put either Marxism or Leninism and so on. So make sure that you put the correct subtype and not the ideology type itself. All right. So by doing this, we're basically finished with creating our country leader. This country leader can already work in the game, but there is a small change that you will need to do in order to have him show up. So let's take a look at that and understand what that is about. I'm going to open the mod folder again. I'm going to go into the root folder of my mod. I'm going to go into history, countries, and open the Cuba file. Now in here, you see that there's this repeating line that says recruit character. What this line does is tells the game to activate the character in the game. So although I have my CUB SpongeBob character created, it's still not activated. So if I were to go into the game, I will not see him. So in order for this character to show up in the game, I just need to copy this ID in here, put him in here, and now I will be able to see this character. And we are basically done creating our country leader. Now, one of the great things about this new character system is that once you've recruited the CUB SpongeBob character, it doesn't matter if it's a country leader or an advisor or a corps commander. Once it's recruited, it is available for all of these roles. Now, obviously you can play around and actually make sure that although maybe he's available as a country leader, you can still limit him as an advisor. And we will see how to do that once we get to creating advisors. But you only need to use this line once, and the character will become available in all of its definition, whether it is a country leader or a general or an advisor. Now, one more thing that you may be wondering about is how do I assign traits for my country leader? Now, various country leaders in Hearthstone 4 have traits, and that is actually very simple. All you need to do is in here inside the country leader brackets, you just need to type traits. And in here you can put the traits of this character. You can locate all the available traits in the vanilla game folder. So let's open that, go to common, and in here I'm going to search for the traits files. Now, in order to make it easier to locate that file, I suggest you type 00_traits. The thing is that if you don't type the 00 at the beginning, then it will find you all the files that contain the word traits, and that'll be a lot of files, and obviously we don't need those. So you will come up with two files. There's one traits file for country leaders and a separate one for generals like field marshals and corps commanders. So one of these files should have the traits that you need. Let's try the first one. So in here, this is the correct file since we have traits like dictator, warrior code, and so on. So all you need to do is to just copy a trait that you want to apply to your character, go back in here and just put it in traits like this, save, and now your character will have this trait in the game. For now, we're done with creating country leader, and we can move on to creating country advisors. Alright, let's proceed with creating our country advisor. Now, our SpongeBob character is going to be a country advisor on top of being a country leader. That is one of the benefits of the new character system, is that it's very modular. So if I want my character to be an advisor, I just need to add the advisor definition in here. And if I change my mind and I only want him to be an advisor, I can just remove the country leader definition, and that character will no longer be a country leader. So let's go ahead and see how we can create advisors. Advisors are a little bit more complex, and that is because how they were defined previously in the game. So in order to make things more simple, I highly advise you to copy an existing advisor entry from the vanilla game. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open the vanilla Hearthstone 4 folder. We'll go to the common folder. In here we'll go to characters. And I actually want an advisor from a different country, not Cuba, because they tend to be a little bit more complex and they include a bit more stuff that I want to talk about. So let's take an advisor from the United States, USA. I'm going to open this file. Let me just close some of this stuff that we don't need. And in here, we'll just need to find an advisor entry. So let's just scroll down until we come up with an advisor. Here we are. So this is the first one, Earl Broder, whatever. So the advisor entry or the advisor definition starts from here, from this bracket, all the way down to here. So I'm going to select this whole section using the Shift key, holding it and clicking, and we'll just copy this whole thing, carry it over to our character file and paste it in here. All right, now there's a lot of stuff going on in here, and of course when you are tackling this for the first time it can be a bit overwhelming, but let's go over these one by one and see exactly what each of these does. So the first thing we have in here is slot. Now all characters that are not country leaders or corps commanders or admirals are defined by the game as advisors. Now, there are many types of advisors. We have theorists, we have high command, we have political advisors, and this one tells the game where that character will appear, in which slot, right? So if I want this character to be a theorist, then I will need to define him as a theorist. If I want him to be a political advisor, then I will need to put political advisor in here. And you can see the various options that you can choose for the slot parameter by going to the vanilla file, double-clicking on slot, pressing the Control key on your keyboard and the F key while holding the Control key, and that will bring up the Find menu. It should put slot in here automatically, and if you click on Next, you see that we now have all of these options like theorist, like army chief, like high command, and so on. So the slot parameter will allow you to decide where this character should be visible, in which slot that you have for the various roles. Next, we have something called idea token. Now, idea token, I have to be completely honest, I'm not completely sure what it is used for. From my personal experience, characters seem to work fine even without idea tokens. So in here you can just put the character name again, like Cuba SpongeBob, or you can actually get rid of it altogether and things should work fine. If you notice any issues, then obviously put it back. But from my experience, this doesn't seem to be making much of a difference. Next, we have something called allowed. So what is allowed? The allowed parameter is usually used to limit the countries that can use this character. And in here you see that the country that can use this character right now is a country whose original tag is the United States. And that is the most common use for the allowed parameter, just to limit the character for the country. Next, we have available. Now, available is used in order to tell the game when the player can click the character in order to use this character. So as you know, we have the characters showing up in the politics screen or in the high command screen. And while the character is shown, not always you can click that character. So in available, you can actually put some parameters that allow you to limit when this character can be used. So for example, I can put something like has political power 100, or I should say has political power more than 100. So that means that only if the country has more political power than 100, then they can use this character, or something a bit even more complex like has civil war equals yes. And that means that only if the country has a civil war, it will be able to actually click on this character to use it. Please note that there is a separate parameter for the cost, for the political power cost, and I will show you that in a minute. But this is another limiter that you can set. Now, you can find all of these possible things that you can put in available on the Hearthstone 4 wiki in the conditions. I will have a link to that in the description of this video. Another way for you to find various things that you can put here is by searching the vanilla file. So once again, if I go here and I double click on available, let's just see it in here, for example, available, let's just find this first character, and I press Ctrl and F, and if I were to click on find next, you can see that we can have all of these options in here. This is for you to experiment. If you have a little bit of experience, then you already know how to use the available parameter. For example, here we have has completed focus, so obviously you can also limit it to a focus that a country has finished. So for now, let's leave it like that. I'm not going to put anything in available, and that means that the character is going to be always available. Now, some of you may be wondering what's the difference between allowed and available. Now, one key difference is that my country has to be Cuba, and that means that this character will not even show up for any other country. So obviously available isn't even relevant because the character doesn't show up, so I can't click on it. Okay, let's go on. We have traits. So just like with our country leaders, we have various traits that we can assign to our advisors. And again, you can find all the available traits in the traits file, like I showed you with the country leader. For now, I'm just going to keep it at communist revolutionary. It doesn't really matter. Next, we have do effect. So do effect is a limiter that you can set as to when the effects or the traits of this character will become available. So for example, we have our communist revolutionary. But this trait will only actually have an effect if the country doesn't have a communist government. And that is a very nice feature. That is something that we did not have before. Again, something that you can play around with. You can go into the vanilla files and see other do effects that you can put in here. Next, we have AI will do. So this determines AI behavior as to when the AI should choose this character. Configuring AI behavior is a bit more complex, so I'm not going to get into that in this video. You can just clear most of this stuff, keep a factor at 1.0, and that should be fine. The AI will most probably pick this character in case the country is played by the AI. This isn't really crucial to the actual process of creating your character. Alright, now there are a couple more parameters that you can use with advisors, and I want to go over to the vanilla file so that we can take a look at some of these. Okay, so in here, for example, we have cost. So this is the cost in political power in order to use this character. You can just add it anywhere in here. I usually like to keep things that are not effects bundled together. So for example, we can put it in here, cost 100, and that means that using this character as an advisor will cost the country 100 political power. One more thing that you may encounter is the ledger option. The ledger function is used to determine where this character will be visible in the intelligence tab. So when you right-click a country and you go into the intelligence tab, you can filter by various intelligence sections like Air Force, Army, Navy, and so on. So if your character is, for example, a theorist, then you will need to assign it the Ledger Army option, so that when the country that is using this character is right-clicked and somebody views its intelligence, then this character will show up in the Army Ledger section. But for now, since we're using this character as a political advisor, that doesn't really matter too much. That is not a setting that you have to put, but for the sake of organization, I highly recommend that you follow through and put the required settings. All right. So we're done creating our advisor. It's becoming a little bit chaotic because you can see that as a country leader, this character is democratic. As an advisor, he's a communist. So it's a little bit funny, it's a little bit weird, but these are definitely combinations that you can create and it will still work. It'll be totally fine. One more thing is that since our character is now an advisor as well as a country leader, we will need to have a small portrait for it as well. Currently, we only have a large portrait defined, but that is something that I'm going to talk about in creating character graphics. Not right now. We can now proceed to step number 4, creating generals and admirals. All right, now let's turn our SpongeBob character, who is a country leader and an advisor, into a general or an admiral. Now, there is one important thing that you should know about this. Although the character system is quite flexible, it will not allow you to assign the same character it will not allow you to assign to the same character two commanding roles. And what I mean by that is that I can't make my SpongeBob character both an admiral and a corps commander. Or I can't make him both a corps commander and a field marshal. I can only designate one role from these three. I'm not sure why this restriction is in place. It could be something that has to do with how the game identifies these various roles. And because we only have one identification, then it doesn't want to mix them because of how different these characters are. I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you don't try to create your character in two of these roles, because if you do, the character will not show in the game. So let's just see how we can give any of these roles to the character. For the purpose of this lesson, I will just make SpongeBob a core commander. So if I want to make a SpongeBob a core commander, this is the code that will allow me to do that. So I'm just going to copy this code into my character file. And let's say, for example, I want him to be an Admiral. So I don't know the code, but I can search for it by pressing the Control key and pressing the F key. And let's search for something that has to do with a Navy, right? So Navy leader. Okay, so Navy leader is the code for an Admiral. And if I want him to be a field marshal, then I will search for something like field. Here we go, field marshal. So by using this code, you can make your character a field marshal. You can assign your character the various traits that you can assign to core commanders, field marshals, and admirals. To find the traits, you need to go into the Hearthstone 4 folder, common. In the common folder, search for 00_traits. And it should be the second file. In here, you can find all the possible traits that you can give to these various characters. I won't go into it right now. It really doesn't matter. It's up to you to customize your character as much as you like. All right, so now our character is a country leader, an advisor, and a core commander. Now our character is ready and we can actually go into the game and test it. Now, our character obviously will not have any graphics, it's proper portrait. The game will assign it the portrait that we have in here, at least as far as the core commander and country leader goes. And this is something that I want to emphasize at this point. Since this picture is configured as the large picture and country leaders and core commanders use the large pictures, it doesn't really matter what you put in here, it will still use the picture that it can find. If it can't find anything, then it will use a default one. For example, it will use a default one for advisor because we have not defined a small image, but I will get more into that once we get to creating graphics. Another thing that our character will not have is localization, so the name might appear a little bit strange, but that is fine, we'll take care of that in step number 6. Now let's go into the game and see if our character shows up. Alright, so if we'll open our politics tab and we click on political advisor, you see that we have a character called Cuba character SpongeBob. Very good. If I were to select an army and try to assign it a new core commander, we also have our Cuba character SpongeBob, and you can see in here that it says that this character is also a political advisor. Okay, very good. And as far as country leader goes, since we are democratic, then our communist leader is not the country leader right now, but if I were to hover here over the Communist Party, you see that the party leader is character SpongeBob. And that means that if the country were to become communist, then our character would be the leader of this country. Okay, so our character works. Very good. We can now proceed to the more, I should say, cosmetic things, although localization is not really cosmetic, it's quite important. And we can proceed to creating our character portraits and localization. Okay, so let's create our character portrait. There are a couple of steps to doing this correctly, and it can get a little bit more complex, but after you do it a couple of times, you will see that it becomes easier and easier until you just do it without even thinking. So in order to create our portrait and link it properly to our character, we will have to define our portrait. We will need to edit the files, and of course we will need to put the correct file location in here. So first of all, let's go into defining our character portrait. we will need two types of portraits. We will need a large one for our corps commander and country leader, and we will need a small one for our advisor. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to go into my new characters mod, and first of all I'm going to go into the interface folder, and I'm going to open the file that we created in step number 1, and I'm going to open it. Now, the .gfx files are files that are responsible for telling the game where the various graphics are located. And the way that it does that is by giving each of these pointers a name, and then just telling it where exactly it needs to go to locate this name of the file. So the first thing that I want to do here is to clean up this file, because obviously right now we have quite a bit of stuff in here and we don't need all of this. I just need one of these entries that start with sprite type. So I'm going to copy this thing, and we're going to be getting rid of the rest of them, except for this first line that says sprite types. We do have to keep that one. So I'm going to click here in the second line. I'm going to hold the shift key on my keyboard. I'm going to scroll down all the way to the end of the file before this last closing bracket, and I'm going to press delete on my keyboard. So now everything is gone, but this line still has its closing bracket, and that is very important. Now I'm going to press Ctrl and V to paste the code that we copied before. All right. So this is going to be the first pointer to our large character file. Let me just save the file here. And now let's see how are we going to handle this thing. So the first thing we have in here is name. So this is just to tell the game what character are we talking about. And it's usually a good idea to start these names with gfx underscore something. If it's a portrait, then sure, makes sense to keep the portrait as well. In here, you can put the country tag, that also helps, just to locate things quicker and faster. So I'm going to keep this whole thing in here as is, except for the GER. I'm going to change it to Cuba, since our character is for the country of Cuba. And in here, I'm going to change the name to SpongeBob underscore large. And that tells me that this portrait is going to be the large portrait for SpongeBob. In here, I need to tell the game where is the actual file for this portrait is located. So let's open our mod folder. We'll go into GFX. We'll go into leaders, Cuba. And this is the portrait that we're going to use, but of course we're going to edit it. So this portrait is currently called Portrait Large SpongeBob. So this is the name of our file. I'm just going to copy the name, and I'm going to put it in here just like this. Make sure to keep the .dds and these closing quotation marks, otherwise things might get broken and not work. This is the format of the file, and this ends the declaration of the texture file. Now, obviously the country that we're using is Cuba, not Germany, so I'm going to change this to Cuba. And now let's just make sure that our path is correct. So we have the GFX folder. Don't bother putting the entire path of your mod. That is not necessary. You only need to put it starting from GFX because this is a graphics file. So GFX, leaders, great, Cuba, good, and the name of our file, .dds. Okay, excellent. Now, obviously, I want to change this file, so I'm going to open it in paint.net. I'm going to grab it into paint.net, click open, and now I'm just going to put SpongeBob in here. I already have a picture. I'm going to select SpongeBob, just like this, and I'm going to paste him in here. I'm going to select keep canvas size, and let's just put SpongeBob in here. I do want to mention that I'm not going to be putting too much effort into these portraits because this lesson is long enough and complex enough. Obviously, you are more than welcome to put a real effort into the portraits and make them great. Great, so we have our image ready. I'm going to go to File, Save. In here, I'm going to choose the DDS file type. Double click, yes. When this screen pops up, make sure to choose the B8, G8, R8, A8 option. If you don't have this option, you may be running an older version of Paint.net, so just make sure to download the most recent one. Click OK, flatten, and our portrait is ready. Okay, so we have our big portrait done, and now we need to link it to our character in our character file. So in here we have something that says civilian large GFX, and you might recognize this thing because this is the name that we have in here. So I'm just going to copy the name from here, put it in here, and we're done. Now there are a couple more parameters for portraits. So you see that here it says civilian, but in other cases it may say something like army and so on. The reason for this is because you can actually define different portraits for the various roles that a character has. So for example, this tells the game that if our character is a country leader, then use this large portrait. If I want to have a different portrait in case it's a military leader, then I can just put another entry in here. In fact, let's take a look at it in here in the vanilla file, see how it looks. Okay, so in here I have army, large, and I can put another portrait. Now, I'm not going to do it here, and the reason for that is because the game uses a fallback system. That means that even if I did not define a specific portrait for my character as a core commander, the fact that I already have a large image for him, the game will fall back to that image. If I don't define it, then it will fall back. If I define it, then it will use the one that's specified specifically for that role. And that is very useful. Okay, so let's just keep it as is for now. Now we also need a small image. As you can see in here, we also have a definition for a smaller image. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to open my mod again. And inside the GFX folder, we have the small portrait that we took again in step 1. So the first thing that I want to do here is to change the name of this file. I'm going to follow the format that I used in here. So I'm going to rename it to portrait small, just so that I know that it's the small version. SpongeBob. All right, now you may want to place this portrait together with that other image, or you may want to put it in a different place. That is completely up to you. For the sake of clarity, I'm just going to put a new folder in here, call it characters. I'm going to put the file in here. I'm going to create another folder called Cuba. And I'm going to put that file in here. All right, now let's create an entry for this file in the GFX file. So to do that, I'm just going to copy this entry, paste it, and obviously change the name from large to small, and fix the path in here. So let's see what's our path. Our path is GFX characters. So let me just get the name so that I don't misspell anything. Cuba, and the name of our file. All right, now that we have that, we need to define this entry in our character file. So I'm going to put small. And now the game knows to link this portrait with this character and use it for the advisor. Okay, so the last thing remaining is to edit that portrait. Now, again, this is not something that I'm going to be putting much effort into. I'm really going to make it very, very simple because these portraits are more complex to edit. So you know what, let's just make it really, really simple. And I'm going to put like a SpongeBob smiling in here, just so that we can see the difference. Okay, there we go. That's starting to look creepy, but whatever. And like this, okay. File, save, okay, good. Okay, so our portraits are ready and we can go into the game and test them to see if they work. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so as you can see, our Cuba character SpongeBob now has its weird thing, looking thing. And if we were to look for SpongeBob, the core commander, he also has a portrait. Very, very good. So our portraits are ready. Hopefully this was clear. If it doesn't work for you on the first try, just double check your paths, make sure that the files are in the correct folders and in the correct format. Eventually, I'm sure that you will figure it out and make it work. For me, it also didn't work when I tried it for the first time, so it's totally fine. Things don't always work on the first try, but keep trying. Alright, so we have our portraits ready. Now we will proceed to creating our character localization. Okay, so we're approaching the end of this lesson, and now we're going to be handling one of the simplest things, and that is to create our character localization. So let's see how to do that. I'm going to open my mod. I'm going to go into the localization folder, English, and open the new characters _L English file that we've created. Now, currently this file obviously has a lot of information and we don't need most of it. So I'm going to remove everything after the first line, or the second line actually. So I'm going to hold the Shift key, scroll all the way down, delete, it's gone. So the way that localization files work is that you have your localization key followed by this pair. You always need to put this. Then you have the quotation marks, and inside the quotation mark you put the actual text that you want to see. In here, of course, we have the definition for the language, and you always need to include that as well. So let's go ahead and put our character name in here. I'm going to go back to my character file. We have our name, and in here, if you remember, we put the localization key. Again, I could have just done something like this, SpongeBob, and that would work fine as well. But by having a localization key, this opens up the ability to localize and translate the characters in case that these characters are not actually people with names that should not be translated, but things like a regency council or an assembly and so on. So I'm going to copy my localization key. I'm going to put it in here before this section, just like this. And in here, I'm going to put the name SpongeBob. And I'm going to save. All right, so that's all you need to know about localizing your character. But one more thing that I do want to mention in this video is how you can add character descriptions. Now, character descriptions can be a great tool to give some background about the character that you've introduced into the game, and this is something that you can only use on country leaders. So to do that, somewhere in your country leader entry between the opening and the closing bracket, doesn't really matter where, you just need to type the following: description, DESC, the short for description, equals, and in here you will put the localization key for the description of your character. So for example, our character is Cuba SpongeBob, followed by underscore DESC, like this. Now, one thing that is very important to remember is that all of this needs to be in caps. It needs to be in uppercase. I don't know why, but otherwise it just doesn't work. So make sure it's all in caps, and of course make sure that the suffix is underscore description. Now I'm going to copy this description, this localization key, into my localization file. I'm going to put it in here, follow the format, and just type some kind of a description. And now my character will have this description. Just in order to test this properly, let's change the ideology for our country leader to something that can be used by Cuba at the start of the game. So let me just find the ideology that is used by Cuba. So we know that Cuba is a democracy at the start of the game. So let's make our character a democratic subtype, for example, liberalism. He's going to be a liberal dictator, that's totally fine. And now let's go into the game and see if our localization shows up. Okay, so we have our country leader SpongeBob, and as you can see, our description of the character also shows up. Okay, so we've reached the end of this lesson. Now you should know everything you need to know about creating new characters in Hearthfire 4. One small thing that I want to mention before this video comes to an end is how you can decide which character becomes the country leader. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. Let's assume that I have two democratic characters, CUB SpongeBob and CUB SpongeBob 2. Now this SpongeBob is liberal and this one is conservative. So how can I tell the game which character is the one who will be the country leader? So the way that the game decides this is by choosing the character that was called first. So for example here, the character that will be the leader for a democratic Cuba will be CUB SpongeBob, because the game encounters him first. If I want SpongeBob 2 to become the democratic leader, then I can just put him in here on top of this one, and then this character will be chosen instead. This is a bit confusing for people who are new to this, and it is actually reversed from how it was before the 1.11 update. So it's quite important for me to convey this information for you. Hopefully this helps. Once again, I can't emphasize this enough. It's totally fine if things don't exactly work out for you on the first try. They haven't for me, they haven't for other very experienced modders. That is totally fine. Sometimes you do need to give these things a couple of tries until you get it right. But eventually you will get it right. So this is how we create new characters in Hearthfire 4. There's a bonus section about creating shared characters, but that is outside of the scope of basic character creation, so you don't have to watch that. If you enjoyed this lesson, please give it a like so that others can see it and learn all of this stuff as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you have any questions or if something wasn't clear, please let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to help you. See you next time. In the bonus section of this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about shared characters. And this covers two types of characters. First of all, the generic characters that are generated by the game when a country doesn't have any specific characters created for it, and custom characters that are shared between multiple countries. So first of all, let's see where these characters are stored. I actually copied them over to my mod. They're stored in History, General. So if I were to open the base game folder, History, General, and in here you have the generic advisors and two files, one for Spain and one for China. So first of all, let's open the generic advisors. I won't be actually creating any of these characters right now in this video because it is long enough, and this is a bit more complex stuff. So if you're watching this, then you probably understand very well what you're doing, so you will figure this stuff out. But let's see what we have in here. First of all, generic characters. We have this section in here that says every possible country. So this is something new that was added in the 1.11 update, and we did not have anything like this before. The game did generate random characters, but it wasn't as structured and as intuitive as it is in here. So you see here that what it says is that every possible country that is not one of these countries, and these are countries that have custom characters, will generate a list of characters. In here, for example, you see that it generates the political advisor, or the first one, and one that has the communist revolutionary trait. So for every country to have an advisor that has communist revolutionary, this is the file that generates them. Obviously, you can also create a new entry in here, and in case you have a mod that has more ideologies, you can tell the game to generate advisors for the ideologies that you have added. So this is very nice. Of course, for each of these advisors, you can give them portraits, and you can assign them various traits and do all of these things here in this file. This is a very nice addition and makes life much easier than how it was before. The second file that I want to take a look at is the Spain shared advisors, and these are advisors that are generated for the Spanish Civil War, advisors that should be available for most Spanish nations. And the way that it works here is that you see that every possible country limit whose original tag is Spain will have generic characters created for it, which is very nice, and again a very handy thing that will no doubt be used by the big mods out there, and can also be used for you in case you have a country that is expected to be split while it is played, and you need to share certain characters between them. So use these files at your own discretion, and I'm not going to go over them because this is very similar to what we have done with the characters so far, so there's really not much new information that I can present here. I just wanted you to be aware of these files, what they do and how they work. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Hopefully you're still alive. I know that I probably lost the will to live a couple of times while recording this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.